So if you're watching this video, you're probably interested in fixing the sunroof on your 3rd gen 4Runner. So I'm going to share what I did to fix mine in hopes that maybe it'll give you a better idea of what might lie ahead of you if you do plan to fix your own. I would say it's not too difficult of a job, especially if you've worked on your truck a number of times beforehand. You don't need a whole lot of special tools. You will need some things like a bench grinder, an impact driver, or even one of the kind of hammer-on impact driver sets. I recommend having like the special GIS bits, but otherwise it's fairly straightforward. It's best to do it with somebody that's also knowledgeable, or at least can lend you a hand for when you have to remove the frame of the sunroof, if it gets to that point. And to that point, I would say pen through this video and look a little bit about what I had to do to really restore my sunroof. I had to actually buy a replacement sunroof frame. I wasn't able to completely fix mine. I probably could have, but I just kind of value engineered that out and figured it wasn't really worth the time or money to fix that. But get an idea on how much time and money you're willing to put into getting a working sunroof back, especially given the fact that removing your sunroof, you're going to not, have the ability to drive it because you won't have a sunroof, and depending on the weather where you live, that might sort of, totally leave this out unless you have another vehicle you can drive instead. I'll show you a little bit about how you can sort of diagnose what might be going on at a few different stages, from just being in the car and pressing your sunroof buttons to removing your sunroof glass and seeing how the slide actually moves back and forth to determine really what you might be working with. And then I'll show you how I fixed it myself. I don't make these videos very often. I only really make them when I think that maybe the community or the knowledge base could stand to benefit from a little bit more added knowledge on the subject. So this is by no means professionally edited or filmed, narrated, etc. So just bear with me on that. But if you do see that anything in the video is lacking information, or I might have done something wrong, or something you would advise or recommend against, please leave it in a comment or on this video. I'm always happy to see if there's something I could have done better, and hopefully it'll serve whoever watches this video next how to do the job better. So with all that, let's get started. And again, leave it in the comments if you have any questions. But thanks for watching.
So if your sunroof is bad, you're probably going to find a number of symptoms. One, of course, being it not moving, but another one is when you press this button, it's just going to go, I won't press it because mine will move, but you'll press it and it'll go clunk. It'll just make some sort of feedback, but it won't actually move anything. If that's the case, there's a few ways that you could try something before this. For one, if your motor doesn't make any noise, then it's likely your motor is probably bad. So what you could do is you could always, check fuses, check electrical, and make sure everything's good there. You can take down this panel pretty easily just by popping this little plastic cover off, undoing a screw in here, and then the whole assembly slides out and down. And then you can make sure that everything's connected and plugged in. If it is, then you can try an entirely new motor from a junkyard or wherever you'd like to see if that changes it. However, if you do want to swap the motor, you have to take the entire headliner out to get to that. So it's a little bit more difficult. You can actually probably get in there without taking the headliner out on second thought. But nevertheless, it's going to be a little bit more disassembly. Another recommended kind of fix is that if you do have an issue, somebody has actually used like a ball peen hammer, just a small hammer, and actually tapped on the back of the motor a few times to help break it loose. I don't know exactly what causes that issue, if it's something just intrinsic to the motor, or if it's something in the tracks, or if it's just how that gear sits in that worm drive inside of that little bracket that sits in there. But if you do need that, you can try that, see if that gets you anywhere. But otherwise, if you're pressing this and it just makes a clunk noise, then it's likely at fault with the gunk and the grease that gets all jammed up in there. So if you can't do a nice simple open and close, then you'll probably have to start doing a little bit more disassembly. So here's one level of diagnostics you can do. So this requires the headliner being out, of course, and dropping this panel here. So there's your sunroof motor. It's held on by 3 bolts. So I took one out. I have to put it back in because now I'm reassembling, but this is how you would do it, of course, if you were disassembling it. You take these 2 off in here, and right inside of there will be the union where this motor spins, the little gear that turns the worm drive in each way. When you open that up, if you find that it has a bunch of the rubberized gunk in there. And if you take a little screwdriver or pick and you start picking at it, and it's just kind of elastic, and it just kind of moves back, and it feels like rubber. It's likely that you have a lot of that material bound up in here. So the other nice thing is once you remove this motor, you're no longer locking in this whole worm drive assembly. So if you already have your glass out like I do here, you'll now free up either side to move independently, which you can start to see how much motion you have if possible. So yeah, I would drop this and check inside of there. So for the sunroof removal, the only fasteners you need, which you can access inside the car with the sunroof just at the closed position, are the 8 screws here. Now there's 2 different types. There's a JIS or Phillips head, and then there's also a Torx head. Tools I highly recommend for this, so you don't risk stripping anything, is an L key T25 Torx driver. L key is kind of important, so you get the leverage to crack it loose. And then if you have the ball end like this, wipe off some of the gunk, you have the ball end like this, you can get at it from different angles and pull it out. This is pretty important. And then again, that JIS screwdriver. This is a Vessel branded one. It's pretty common on Amazon, and it comes with these interchangeable bits on them, or inserts. I guess they're called blades with that JIS bit. Sorry about the focus on this camera. Use this as well, because again, you do not want to risk stripping any of these. And then in terms of diagnostics, you can do with the glass out and the headliner out and removing your motor. So now each of your slides are free to move on their own. If you slide back your slide right in here enough so that the little locking tab, which is, you can see it just here, so that drops down and out of that groove and now inside of the tracks here, you can test and see if this whole assembly moves while everything else is locked into place. The main point there is, and this was the issue that I had particular to mine, all of that grease that gets locked up inside of that track, or actually I guess the track's on the other side, obviously within the frame rail, the worm drive. If that's all locked up, but it's also rusted and corroded to either your frame, which I don't believe it can because this is aluminum, but if it locks up and rusts inside, under here, and really inside of this, which this was super rusty when I took mine out, if those don't work independently, then in my opinion, you might need a whole new sunroof assembly, tracks and everything, because getting that out and dealing with that is just a massive pain. And if it is locked up, you can't even slide this all back to get into the 2 screws, which you can see hold on to this little braced on bracket here for that tube. So that's going to be really, really difficult to fight, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I would say if you can move both of these slides independently with the motor removed but the tubes and everything in place, that means that at least your slides aren't locked up and those worm drive cables aren't seized into place. But it does mean that you at least have now some free motion in here, and you just have to get rid of all that caked on junk, which is what I'll show you in a bit. So that's, I think, the best way to get your kind of final diagnostics for your root cause on this ultimately. So here's my old sunroof. So you can see just how badly rusted all of this was with all of the caked on grease that also shows rust because it is so brown. This is locked inside of here. I had to take these out and actually strip the screws because I tried kind of going in an angle to get to those screws on top. You can see one's still sort of locked in place there, because I essentially had to unscrew this one and then screw this one, and then this backed out instead of the screw backing out up top. That's how bad the rust was. I made it worse because I started going in and out and moving it and just cracked it more, but this will not slide out. I used a torch to see if maybe like melting all that grease would help it slide out, and nope. And for, I think, the fairly leisurely disassembly of a headliner to get everything out, not fight it. I really don't personally like just fighting rusted stuff. I've had my fair share of that, and I try to avoid it. So if it's like this, and once this is, of course, in place, and this whole frame is locked together, and the worm drive is locked together on this, that's when I say you're too far gone. This side, see, I haven't even taken it off, but I have, I think, good reason to believe that this would not be any different. And there you go. There's more of the crud there. So I would probably call it quits after this, and then however you decide to source a new frame, go that route. So in between these two videos, I have the sunroof frame out of the vehicle. So to do that, it's pretty straightforward. If you've done as I've already done in that video and you've removed the headliner, your frame is right there and easily to, kind of access and get out. It's really easy to see. There's only a couple 10mm bolts that go around it. And then there's also like the drain tubes you'll have to remove. There's the harness for the light that's over the passenger seat, but there is one threaded bolt that's a little odd to remove on the passenger side. It's in one of those sort of finger like retainer clips that it threads through rather than like an actual threaded nut or something like that. So to remove that, at least the only way I did it, which it didn't seem like it's going to affect anything going forward, is just to get a small flat blade screwdriver and go between each of those fingers that hold onto that bolt and pry them down so you effectively clear that bolt entirely and you'll allow it to drop down. I would do this first, of course, so it's not the last thing holding on the frame. But again, just pry those fingers out and then remove all the other 10mm bolts, the harness I mentioned, the drain tubes, and then your whole sunroof will be able to drop out. All right, so to remove the slide here that's connected to the worm drive, you'll have to remove this part back here. And to do that, there's a clip in here that you just release. You release it on the other side, and then you can go ahead and slide it back out. So there's also a couple pieces of small hardware in here that could be easy to lose, so it's important to keep in mind. Besides the obvious ones like the screws, you can see on this arm, which is attached to the slide, there's a small bushing. As you can see, it kind of comes up with the magnetic part right there. That bushing will sit on this little post, and then that will ride inside of the track on here, but of course it's on the inside. I can't pull this out right now because I have the other screw in holding it in, this one here, but eventually when you go to put it back in, that will slide in there. And then on the reverse side, there's also a little plastic cap that goes in there. Just make sure you don't lose that. So now to have your whole assembly now slide, if your glass is out, you have to have your motor out, of course, so that the worm drive isn't being tied up by that motor, which is easy to remove and that's already covered. So you follow the copper tubes, then you'll have the track. This will slide back because you no longer have it connected in here, and of course, like I said, not to the motor. So if you need to, just grab this whole assembly. Maybe you don't put a rag around if you don't want to get all greasy, but grab that and you'll start to be able to slide it all back. And then all of this hardware here will open up pretty quickly, and then you can access all these bolts. You can access these two bolts here. Those two, they hold on to the where it's kind of soldered onto the little joint for the rest of the copper tube for the what I'll call the the supply side versus this one, which is I guess the return, just for lack of a better term. And so of course once you start sliding it back, you can't go all the way because there is this screw here with this bushing to prevent it from going back all the way, so you have to remove that. And so right here, these are the two parts. So there's the bushing, and then there's a brass spacer in there, and then there's another brass screw that'll come out pretty easily with just a JS driver. I don't know what size this is, but this works really well. So that's out. Now you can slide the whole assembly outward. So here it is, the track came out. There's that little bushing I mentioned that rides on this part right here. So now you can start to do it with two hands, and now you can just start sliding it out. And there you go. That's how long that whole worm drive is. So at this point, I'd recommend cleaning this up. You obviously start taking off all the rotted on gunk here, but I just put some gas in this container, and I'm just gonna brush this and just get it really nice and clean. So at this point, I totally forgot to film the part where you actually remove all that caked on grease from the worm drive, but it's real simple. If you have a bench grinder with a wire wheel, just take that cable and start running it through the bench grinder and just grinding away all of that caked on grease. I didn't damage my worm drive to any significant degree doing this. I'd wear a respirator at this part too, because all that stuff gets really dusty, and you don't want to be breathing that in. But just keep running through it and cleaning it up as best you can. The finish, the best sort of condition of that cable is going to be pretty obvious as you start cleaning it up. Go as hard as you can towards the front and end of the cable. That's not going to run through the motor, so it's not critical to get in there. So, you can, so especially up near that actual slide assembly, so you don't risk kind of hitting other parts. You can avoid that, but that's how you'd clean it up right then and there. It's pretty quick, especially if you're bench grinder. If you don't have a bench grinder, you can soak it in gas and solvent, especially the other video that covers this. You can do that as well, but that's going to take a long time. So I'd recommend to get it against it. Definitely get a bench grinder. So I would give your tracks a quick sweep down, wipe and clean, get a rag with maybe some gas on it if you want. Be careful of your headliner or your, cover here so you don't get stuff on it. Then you have to do is start sliding this down in here, but get yourself some proper lubricant like white lithium grease. Okay, I kind of jumped through a few steps there, but I can summarize it all here. So what you should do first is feed your worm drive through the slot here first, just to get it set, and then I would shorten it up, feed it through all the way. You'll start to feel some resistance as you start to go around the bend in the tubes that it travels through, but then you put it up there and let the actual slide hang out here, and then come in with your actual armature for your sunroof and put in the first unit, or the first section. And then what you'll notice is there's this little nylon or something tab right here. But then you also notice this piece. If you follow it back, it's connected to the slide. This is connected to this little piece right here that comes up into this arm, and it actually sits on top of this little arm that's on this slide. So what I just did is I took the screwdriver when I slid all of them together and then kind of lifted it up so it sat on it, and then I just grabbed here so it all slid as one unit. The only slightly tricky thing, it's not even tricky, it's just if you have two people you don't even have to worry about it. Slide this forward, and then you'll need to make sure that these two knobs on this part slide in as you're sliding it in, and of course you need to time that correctly so you don't over travel, but otherwise it's not too bad. So slide it in here. This is all dry fitted. I don't have any lubricant on this. I'm gonna go out and get some, but for now I'm just going through with a rag and some gas and just wiping down everything in here, trying to clean it up as much as I can before I put new stuff on it. So I would always work one side at a time, so you can use one side as a reference just in case you may get something wrong or you need to double check yourself, which is exactly what I have to do here. So this white tab, which is again all covered in junk because this is on the side I haven't worked with, but you can see that this sits in this groove and it's right next to our slide. So when I come back over here, I'm looking to aim for roughly the same. And then, so there's our little cap. Don't forget your little plastic cap. You come around here, you can see we have that little bushing on that post, and then we're gonna line up this guy to meet inside of here, similar to on this side. You can start to see how it's leaning and it seems to go up here. So I ended up taking this slide off. It was really gunked up with really hard grease, so I just cleaned it and gave it the same old treatment. Used a couple picks and stuff to get in the grooves and channels, and then scraped down this side. I would just take that off so I don't get all the crap back in here, but I'm taking this back out again and I'm just dry fitting everything, make sure I have it aligned right before I get it all gummed up again, but definitely clean that out. So now I'll start to actually just align this, put that bushing into this slot and set it on there. You see that little stud that sits out? You can see where that tracks. There's another thing too. You'll notice that on this guy here, there's this stud that sticks out, and there's also another stud right down here, and then this is the hole where one screw goes, this is the hole where the other screw goes. Those studs are meant to correspond with both this groove here and that pocket there. So they'll fit on, that one will act as a little pivot here. Not good at illustrating it, and this one will slide as needed, if needed. So there's another aspect to this that I think is good to illustrate just in case you might have any issues leading with it. So there's a purpose to this long tab, this little nylon piece, and then this tab here. So this groove will actually lock this in place. When this tab drops down to the little channel right here, that is when it allows the sunroof to actually go back. And so that's why this piece, because it's controlled by the motor, when you send the signal essentially to slide the whole roof back, part of the safety system, we'll first move, I'm gonna zoom back out. We'll first move this out, out, out. It'll allow this piece to travel down that arm. Whoops. And then it'll allow this to drop down, and then the whole piece will start moving together. So it's a little safety piece in there, but that is how that whole system works. So here's the 2 lubricants I'm going to use for the sunroof. Plan to use this guy to feed as I'm feeding the worm cable through it, just because it has the little nozzle right here, or the straw for the nozzle. And then this one, just because it allows me to just kind of add a little bit more without getting the spray everywhere. So you don't have to do both. You could probably do one or the other if you want to save a little cash, but I just decided to go both ways. All right, so I applied some of the white lithium grease. I went a little overboard. I'm gonna clean it up, but there you go. You can see the cable in there. Pretty nicely lubed. I move it inside and out a couple times. As you use the sunroof more, it'll get more and more lubed up. Here's this little armature. Got a little overspray there, but put some of the white lithium grease from the bottle on a few of these contact points. Gonna clean that up a little bit more, and then I'm gonna start feeding these back on like I did before. So there's that bushing. Put some white lithium grease on there. I'm gonna continue this same general logic on all the rest of these moving parts. I'm not gonna be as heavy. Again, I'm gonna clean a lot of this up. I know that's probably what some of you are thinking, but that's what it's going in as. Get back out here the next morning, get all the parts laid out. Some of the smaller parts like the screws, this little washer, or this little nylon kind of bushing here fell out, and I had to go look for it. So again, just be mindful of that. We're just gonna start reassembling the other side. Alrighty, so I got both sides all assembled. Again, a little bit too much in there. I'm gonna put it up in the roof and clean it up a little bit more. Put the sunroof glass in it and see how much is protected, and see if maybe this will just wear away. Again, if this is the fix for even a couple years, I'll be fine with it. And so that's kind of my game plan. Don't forget to put this piece back in. It just slides into the little slot down here, and then it clips in with this clip here. Make sure you push it in all the way. I actually didn't do that fully at first, and I double checked it. It was still loose, so just give it an extra nice secure snap. Again, at this point, you can decide if you want to put your glass in. I wouldn't, especially if you're doing this by hand. It's just too heavy at that point. But yeah, let's go ahead and put it back in the 4Runner. Okay, go. So I got the sunroof assembly back in the truck. So I did this by myself, which was not fun. So definitely grab a buddy or a friend or someone to help you out. But what I did is slide it through the back, gently sort of place it on top of the headrest here, and then sort of just try to get it up in place. What I figured to start with are the 2 studs in front that take on the 2 10mm nuts there. So what I did is I used one hand on this side, held it up with my head here, kept the other nut in my hand, felt for where the stud was meeting up with the hole, did it, kind of lined it up, put that nut in there, just threaded it on, only maybe a thread or 2. And then I grabbed another 10mm bolt, put it right up in there, and then started doing those, and then just walked my way around, put them all back in there. Don't tighten them down all the way, I'll put them all in a couple threads just so you can rack the whole assembly in properly, and then run them all up with whatever tool you want to use for that. So it wasn't too bad. Just make sure your drain tubes don't get stuck up above anything. They're usually too short and they shouldn't have that problem, but just make sure you do that. And the next thing you're going to want to do is start getting some of the other things in place, like the drain tubes, like this wire here, and get your motor mounted. When you're doing all that, make sure you don't lose the small nuts, little insert nuts that go there. One of mine popped out and I forget where I put it right now, but just make sure you put those back in. Those are where the motor mounts to. So I'll do a quick recap before the rest of these videos load. So at this point, diagnose that your cables are likely gunked up. The 2 slides can move freely, so you've removed your frame. You've removed all that sunroof track assembly, the armature and everything. You've cleaned up all the gunk. You've re-lubricated it, and you put it back in. You made sure all that little hardware was in place. And then you've brought the whole sunroof frame in without the glass, put it back up into the car, and then ran all those bolts in. You can leave the drain bolts and things, or the drain tubes and stuff out for now. So at this point, I would say you can start putting the sunroof glass back in, and then you can go ahead and test the whole sunroof together. I would not test it without the glass in. You want to make sure that those slides are always together and everything's clocked in the right position before you move forward. The thing about the sunroof bolts is the Torx bit you can see, and the Phillips head. The Phillips head is right here. This one has a shoulder on it, and the Torx screw does not. So obviously they're for different positions, and you'll see on here where the two holes are. The Phillips and JIS screws, they go on the outside, and the Torx go on the inside. So Torx will be here, and then Phillips will be furthest and then furthest. All right, so here I am getting the sunroof back in, putting the screws in. A little tip on helping with the alignment is you can see where the old screws would sit and grab onto the actual sunroof. And that's kind of where that finish and paint is missing. So to help dial you back in, just pretty much move your assembly until those screws start sitting down, and then I would tighten up the, I would leave the Phillips and the JIS screw, I would leave that loose and tighten up your Torx screws. All right, so got everything back in, turn the car to the on position, and you can see the sunroof is back. Just holding the control, motor's moving. I'm not sure why it's stopping there, so I'll just have to make sure everything's fine, but it does go through all the motion. And it'll tilt. So yeah, looks to be pretty good. I'm gonna keep messing with it, make sure everything's all aligned, but good signs so far. So something else I'd recommend while you're in there is checking your sunroof drains. Before you reconnect them, or even if you decide to not move forward, I'd grab a bottle. I have one of these pressurized bottles, which helps. I'll just put the nozzle right up to here, and I'll start filling it with water just to check if the water comes out properly. And you can see I tested the back one here, and it does. So I would just go through there, and if it is clogged, there's a lot of methods to clean them out. You can use compressed air, which some people don't recommend. I would use just a piece of string trimmer wire, go through there. So yeah, there you have it. That's how you fix your sunroof on your 3rd gen 4Runner. Overall, I would say if I were to do this again, or if you watch this whole video and you're familiar with removing a sunroof, you have all your materials and tools on hand, and especially you have someone else to help you with actually pulling everything down, and maybe you both can work on individual sides yourselves. This might take you 5 hours to do. That might be pretty aggressive, but I think if you're working on a weekend or something when you have the time and you're running through it, you can really I think bang this out pretty quickly. Really worth it, I think, to get that sunroof back. But again, you have to do that kind of diagnosis in the beginning to make sure that you may not need an entire new sunroof frame, sunroof assembly, because that's going to add to your cost. It's going to add to your time and travel to go to a junkyard and get the parts and check those parts too, and really kind of double your headache there. So check those all out. But I hope this helps. I know there's really only one other video by Stone's Garage or something where he goes over this with his 96 4Runner. And he was really the one that gave me kind of the confidence to do this. And so I just wanted to add a little bit more information to the kind of, again, like I said, the body of knowledge to all this, and show a little bit more detail on the sunroof tracks, and some of that fix. But yeah, really, I think you can do this if you're comfortable enough, just, using your hands and working on your truck. You should be fine. So again, thanks for watching. Leave any comments if you have any questions.